there is but one reality that draws us together this evening. It's not the fact that we come together to be mutually encouraged by one another's presence, one another's faith, conversation with each other, although that in itself would be enough to draw us to a place like this. It is not the fact that there are worship leaders, Anita Roberts or Danae Davis, who stand up and read from the biblical account the story of what happened so many years ago. And as they read, we in mind are transported back to that place and see it as it occurred. It strengthens our faith, and that would be enough. But that isn't the primary reason we come. It's not even the music. To join our voices together as the sanctuary strings and the organ and the choir and Marvin Ponder lead us in music. We give words to our faith. It strengthens us to hear others sing together. The sanctuary is filled with the sound of the music, and our hearts are elevated. It's enough to bring us to a place like this, but that's not the reason we come. Even the soaring sound of the anthem, our own sanctuary choir, Cheryl Smith conducting, Natalie Hohensy's voice, lifting us as though to the very gates of heaven. And who could miss? Who could miss? Our own Kimo Smith on the organ. Certainly that is enough to bring us to a place and a moment like this. No question. But even that is not the principal reason we come. There is but one reason that draws us here. And that one reason is Jesus, the one and only. Jesus first, last, and best. Jesus, who on a night not unlike this one 2,000 years ago, passed through an experience the likes of which human beings have never fully passed. For a window into that night and into his experience, we go to the Gospel of John, the 13th chapter, page 1603 in your pew Bible. We go to that gospel because we want to enter into that experience. We want to see the mind of Jesus. We want to feel his heart. I've pointed it out just recently, but it bears repeating, that the Gospels are not really the best when it comes to biography. They're not the best because the focus on the final days and hours of Jesus' life are so out of proportion to the rest of the account. Matthew has 28 chapters. By chapter 21, we are already into the final week of Jesus' life. Mark has 16 chapters. By chapter 11, we're into the final week. Luke has 24 chapters. By chapter 19, we are into the final week. By chapter 9, we are into the final trip to Jerusalem. And John, the Gospel of John, the Gospel from which we read this evening, 21 chapters. By chapter 12, we are into the last week. By chapter 13, we are into the last night. 21 chapters. Chapter 13, we're already at the last night of his life. As biographies, they don't do a very good job because if you read them merely as biographies, the understanding to which you quickly come is that it almost seems like the earlier accounts of his life are mere preface, prelude to what will happen in that final week, on that final night, in those final hours. That is the focus. Because it is there that something of great significance occurs. You will remember that in this Gospel of John, back toward the beginning, we join Jesus on another night as he sat knee to knee with a rich ruler in a garden. They conversed about the things of God and how to enter into the experience with God. And it was in that context that were uttered the words that have covered this globe time and again. Probably the best known passage in all of Scripture. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him might not perish, but have eternal life. Well, on this last night, we are about to see that love put into action. And so we read once again from John the 13th chapter, beginning with the first verse. John records this. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for Him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved His own who were in the world, He loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under His power, and that He had come from God and was returning to God. So He got up from the meal, took off His outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around His waist. After that, He poured water into a basin and began to wash His disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around Him. You caught that phrase at the end of verse 1. That phrase that says, having loved His own who were in the world, He loved them to the end. The New Living Translation renders verse 1 this way. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that His hour had come to leave this world and return to His Father. He had loved His disciples during His earthly ministry, and now He loved them to the very end. But there is a variant reading, a margin reading, a footnote reading of that last phrase that says this, and now He showed them the full extent of His love. It really can be, I understand, translated both ways, that He loved them to the very end, and that by loving them to the very end, He will show them the full extent of His love. Now, if you follow John's gospel, you realize that in a sense, is the theme sentence for all that will follow in this second half of the gospel. The way He loves them to the very end, the way He shows them the full extent of His love unfolds in those final hours of His life. He will preach His most eloquent sermon on love from a pulpit at Calvary, a rough-hewn pulpit, where He will hang suspended between heaven and earth, because heaven does not claim Him and earth does not want Him. That's the full extent of His love. That is loving them, loving us to the very end. In fact, we know that because just a few chapters later on this very evening, He will speak to His disciples and He will say to them, greater love has no one than this, that one lay down their life for their friends. But there's actually something else, something more immediate that happens that gives us a glimpse into the full extent of His love. There's a certain pattern in which these verses unfold, in which they give us a window into the occurrence that evening. There are two trajectories, two pathways unfolding, one in the heart, in the mind, and in the life of Judas. It tells us that the enemy of his soul is at work and has bent him in a direction, and Judas follows that through. But then the passage also tells us something about Jesus. It says that Jesus, knowing who He was, where He had come from, where He was going, that He was the Father's Son, knowing that He wanted to manifest the full extent of His love, and then it unfolds naturally. He got up from the table, took off His outer garment, girded Himself with a towel, stooped to the ground, and began to wash the gnarled, dusty feet of His disciples. It's an almost natural progression. As I read those verses, it calls to mind Philippians 2, where the Apostle Paul will pen those majestic words, who being in the very form of God, did not count it His need to grasp His position, but emptied Himself and became a servant. The New Testament scholar Bruce Milne describes it this way. He says, as the meal gets underway, an astonishing scene is enacted. Proper etiquette, generally more important in the East than in the West, taught that guests, begrimed from journeying through the dusty streets, should, on arrival, have their feet washed by a slave. This was a particularly humble task. Listen to this. A particularly humble task included in a list of works which a Jewish slave should not be required to perform. Not even a Jewish slave. As they commence the meal with feet as yet unwashed, since apparently none of the disciples are prepared to fulfill the duty, after all, one does not wash the feet of peers, Jesus himself rises, divests himself of his outer clothing, girds himself with a towel, and proceeds to wash, then dry, his disciples' feet. Do you find it interesting that as John records the story, he gives us that phrase, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And the next thing you know, Jesus is on his knees, dirty feet in his hands, washing, cleaning, serving. You understand what that says? It says that bound up in the reality of Jesus showing us the full extent of his love was his choice to serve. Whether it meant the most mundane task, the most distasteful task, or whether it meant stretching his arms out that they might be nailed to a cross, it was all service. Some of us think, if I could only serve God in a grand way, in a great way, maybe there could come a time when I might be called upon to stand for Jesus before mobs, before angry people, before people that call for me to recant. Then I would be faithful. I would stand. Let me go up in flames. Let me go out in a blaze of glory. I will serve him. But that's not where Jesus begins. He now showed the full extent of his love. And almost immediately, he's on his knees. On his knees, washing feet. Feet. As distasteful as it was for them to do that, it's just that strange for us to do it. After all, it doesn't have a resonating echo in our culture, in our society. We don't want much to do with feet, do we? Former President George W. Bush was in the home of his parents. It was during the time of his presidency. He was sitting in the living room speaking with his father. He was at home. He was relaxed. This was his family. So as he sat there in the living room, he propped his feet up on the coffee table near his chair. His mother came in and took one look and said, "Take your feet off my table." To which his father said, "Barbara, he's the President of the United States. He can put his feet where he wants to put them." And his mother turned and looked at her husband and said, "I don't care who he is. I don't want his feet on my table. Take your feet off my table." She quite accurately depicts how we feel about feet. Feet are dirty, gnarly, sometimes dusty, often smelly. We don't want much to do with feet. Because of that, if we are called upon to wash feet as we have this evening, most of us are very careful before we leave home to bathe, or at least wash them in advance, so that when we get here and they are washed, there won't be lint floating around in the water. We want to make it as tasteful as possible. There was a rather amazing incident that happened just a few months ago. A group from Loma Linda went to Ethiopia. They went to Ethiopia, to Dembi Dolo, to provide medical service and specifically dental service. 2 dental students from our own school went, and 2 dental hygiene students went. As they were there, they took care of the needs, the oral needs of many of the people who lined up and waited to be treated. There was a girls' hostel there, run by the Catholic sisters. 27 young women live in that hostel. They come, I am told, from incredibly brutal backgrounds. They have been brutalized. Some of the stories they don't even speak of. One of the young ladies in that hostel was rescued from the graveyard. Terrible pasts. It was almost at the end of their mission trip that these 4 young women, 2 dental students, 2 dental hygiene students, decided that they wanted to do something special for these girls there in that hostel. And so they went into that hostel and they did 3 things. One of them would stand behind the young woman and rub her back and rub her shoulders. Another would kneel at her feet and wash her feet, wash them clean, and then would paint each toenail pink. I spoke with Dr. Larry Thomas, who was in touch with the Sisters of Charity, who told him about the incident. And Larry said to me, those young women were blown away. Nothing like that had ever happened to them. To have someone kneel before them, wash their feet, massage them, paint their toenails. Larry said, they will never forget it. Because that's what happens when we serve, when we show the full extent of love. That service sometimes can take other avenues, other forms. There's a gentleman by the name of Saul Cruz. Saul Cruz and his wife Pilar run a ministry outside of Mexico City. It's not just any kind of ministry. It is a most uncommon ministry. Saul and Pilar Cruz run a ministry at one of the large garbage dumps outside of Mexico City. The garbage dump where there are many people who live nearby and who live off the garbage thrown into the garbage dump. It is right there that they have set up shop and they serve others. One wonders, what is it in their experience? What is it in Saul's experience that has driven him to that place, driven him to serve others? After all, he did not grow up as a person of faith. As nearly as I can piece together the account, here's what happened. Somewhere fairly early in life, maybe his mid-teen years, Saul was given a book that was entitled The Cross of Christ, written by a Christian theologian by the name of John Stott. Saul read that book, The Cross of Christ, and it was as he read that book that he experienced a true conversion, a change of heart, a turning toward this one and only Jesus. It was sometime thereafter that somebody told him that that scholar, that theologian who had written that book he read, John Stott, he would be speaking in Mexico City. And so between walking and bus rides, Saul finally managed to make it to that place, managed to make it into that auditorium, and heard John Stott speak, though it would have been through a translator. After the meeting ended, as people began to filter away, Saul hung by, waiting. He had no place to stay. Somebody, one of those who had helped to organize the meeting, saw him standing there and made their way over to Saul. Do you have a place to stay? No, I don't. Well, please, you must come. You can stay with us. And so they took Saul in. Imagine his utter shock when he realized he would not only be staying in the same house with John Stott, but in the same room. He was absolutely embarrassed. He was not a person of any kind of means. He was dirty. His shoes were filthy. And here he would be sleeping in the same room with John Stott. He went to bed after shoving his shoes under his bed, out of sight, and I imagine it took him a while to get to sleep. When Saul woke up the next morning and rose to leave, Stott had already arisen and had left. But sitting there by his bed were his finely cleaned and polished shoes. I don't know where Saul got the heart for people at the garbage dump. But something in me wonders if some of that doesn't go back to a man who touched his heart and then shined his shoes. Jesus did that. He walked the dusty pathways of Galilee and Judea, touching the hearts of people, calling them to follow him, transforming and changing their lives. But then, realizing that service sometimes requires the most mundane of acts, when he wanted to show them the full extent of his love, we see him on his knees, their feet in his hands, doing the task a slave wasn't even asked to do. I suppose that's why the early church father Origen, early African Christian writer and theologian, one of the most influential writers of the church of that time, wrote these words: Jesus, my feet are dirty. Come even as a slave to me. Pour water into your bowl. Please, come wash my feet. In asking such a thing, I know I am overbold, but I dread what was threatened when you said to me, if I do not wash you, you have no fellowship. So wash my feet then, because I long for your companionship. And so it is that Jesus, the one and only, Jesus, the one who draws us here this evening, is the Jesus who wishes to wash your feet and your soul. It is the Jesus who says, I came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give my life a ransom for many.
Thank you for watching the Discover channel. This channel's primary focus is to share uplifting and enriching spiritual content with people of all backgrounds of life. These presentations will enhance and develop you intellectually so that you can make informed decisions that will assist you in your day-to-day life. Our goal is to bring hope to the viewers and encourage them. Should you share this vision, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your family and friends so that they too can benefit from this content. We have a Patreon account should you wish to support this channel so that we can produce more of this content. Books and merchandise will also become available as the channel grows. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you at the next one.